Losing the Plot is a series about video game narratives, and as such contains spoilers. Today's video features spoilers for the game Celeste, but it also features discussion on mental health, bullying, and abuse, so viewer discretion is advised. If you are affected by any of the themes discussed in this video, I have placed some links in the description if you need to seek help. Mental health is a difficult topic to discuss at the best of times. Media has tried, with mixed results, to represent these kinds of struggles over the years, and as video game storytelling matures, it's only natural that the topic has snuck in there too. But it's still rare to find it handled well. Most of the time, you'll see things like sanity meters, and while personally I don't find this questionable, it's not a realistic depiction of a mental disorder, and there are a lot of people who do take issue with this. But there are two games that tend to come up a lot on the topic of doing it well. The first is Hellblade, a game that went out of its way to represent psychosis and reached out to a specialist to ensure fair representation. The second of these is the game we're talking about today, Celeste. This did not have specialists involved, but the themes were drawn from the developer's own struggles with anxiety and depression, giving it a different feel, but no less effective as representation. If you're unaware of the game, it was an indie title released in 2018 to great acclaim. It stars a girl named Madeline who makes the decision to climb a mountain, the titular Celeste. Her reasons aren't clear to start with, but as she climbs, strange things happen on the mountain and she is forced to face who she is and why she's doing this. It's not a super complex story, but it quickly becomes apparent that everything Madeline does is a metaphor for her mental health issues. And as someone who has talked about my own mental health issues in various places online, the themes did not pass me by. In fact, the themes were handled so well that the game quickly became one of my favourite games from 2018. Today, I'm going to do something quite personal. I'm going to examine the mental health themes of Celeste through the lens of my own struggles. I'm going to tell my story and how I saw it reflected in Madeline's story. It's going to be a hard one to tell, but for me there's no other way to celebrate the effectiveness of this game's narrative. Okay, here we go. Let's climb this mountain together. The first step is admitting that you have a problem. The next and much longer step is figuring out what you need to do about it. For me, I can't pinpoint exactly when I knew I had a problem, but eventually it became too obvious that something needed to be done. As a child, I was bullied, from my earliest memories of primary school right up until I received my GCSEs. And I do mean my earliest memories, which involve being terrified to go outside during break times because of a group of boys who decided they want to beat me up every time they were out of sight of a teacher. At high school, I was made to feel worthless by a whole cohort of people who felt that I was weird and unpleasant and needed to be harassed about it at every opportunity. Even my attempts to speak back were mocked, sending the clear message that no matter what I did, everyone was going to hate me. This has led to an adulthood full of anxiety over both my self-worth and my ability to interact with other people. I constantly worry about talking to people I don't know because I still have that feeling that an undeserving person like me is just going to get put in their place again. I have social anxiety. I often feel inadequate and worthless. My self-esteem has been in the toilet for much of my adult life, and every day is a struggle. But I can talk about this openly now because I took those initial steps to realize it's okay to talk about these things, even if it isn't easy. Forsaken City, the first level of Celeste, reflects this acknowledgement of a problem. Madeline finds herself at the bottom of an insurmountable challenge, in this case a vast mountain, but she knows that she has to face it. Her first words are her assuring herself that she can do this, the words that I've often said to myself in my worst episodes, pushing myself to take the steps I need to move towards recovery. She then encounters two connected problems. Within seconds of starting her journey, there's an obstacle. A slab almost falls on top of her. She then encounters an old lady living at the foot of the mountain who mocks her for complaining about the falling slab. Madeline has to climb this mountain and has convinced herself of its importance, but she's encountered resistance twice within the opening minutes of her climb. Her fears that this is not going to be an easy task have been proven correct almost immediately, but she keeps going and immediately faces another obstacle when a bridge collapses and she almost falls to her death. She uses a mysterious dash ability to save herself, but the sprite work makes it clear that she's been shaken up by the experience. Again, moments after making her journey to prove herself, she's shaken up. The level proper starts after this. There are numerous challenges that show off the game's focus on tricky platforming, but in this level the challenge is quite low. There's a feeling that this is doable, that these first steps are a sign of things to come, and we can definitely pull this off. The music is gentle and the challenges are short and littered with checkpoints, so it never feels too tricky. You know what? I might be able to climb this mountain. Yeah, I might be able to do this. My dreams were always about visiting new places with friends. Often the friends weren't actually people I knew in real life, they were constructs, usually amalgamations of people that I knew. The places we'd visit were surreal in that way that dreams often are, but every single time while exploring these places, I would lose my friends. They would disappear, and it would throw me into a panic, and exploration became a desperate search for the lost friends I'd never again be able to find. I'd wake up anxious and alone. This panic manifested in daylight hours as a persistent belief that no one really wanted to be friends with me, that I was worthless. Everything I did, I would pick it apart and find fault with it. Every thought was negative, believing that I was terrible, inadequate, and unlikable. I'd come to personify this voice out of frustration. I'd view it as some kind of gremlin, sapping away my positive feelings and feeding off my negativity. It was the enemy, but it was one that held me in its grasp and seemingly couldn't be defeated. In my dreams, I'd be endlessly losing my friends, and in my waking hours, I'd be shackled to an enemy. In the second level of Celeste, Old Sight, the mountain climb gets trickier. Upon reaching some old ruins, Madeline encounters a mysterious mirror. As she passes her reflection, albeit a darker version of herself, it breaks free and flies off. The level at this point gets surreal, with weird starry voids that help extend Madeline's dashes in specific places. The whole area feels off, and the darkness of it feels almost oppressive, and yet it's oddly beautiful. Eventually, Madeline encounters the part of herself that escaped the mirror, which confronts her and tells her that she's not good enough to climb this mountain. It's here that this part of herself, who I'll give the fan nickname of Madeline, gives chase. Madeline does everything she can to escape this evil twin who hounds her relentlessly, following her every move and taking her down as she comes close. It's a stressful sequence with little respite. At the end of the chase, Madeline finds a phone booth which rings as she approaches. It's here that she speaks to an unknown person that we learn she had a close relationship with, but clearly no longer does. Most likely an ex or a close friend that she's had a falling out with. She then realizes it's all a dream, and is promptly eaten by the phone booth. After waking up, she finds the real phone booth and calls her mother, who is concerned for her daughter, and urges her to stay calm. This is a fascinating level that feels like the first part of the journey to mental health recovery where it all goes a bit wrong. The voice inside your head that taunts you becomes louder again and urges you to give up what you're doing. The people around you try and do their best to encourage you, but they don't know what you're facing. As a conversation with Theo and the phone call with Madeline's mother show them to be sympathetic, but because Madeline's experience just happened sort of in a dream, neither of them fully understand what's shaken her up so much. Madeline is a lot like the gremlin I'd imagined for myself, the one that convinced me I was worthless. The phone call and the dream especially hit me hard based on my own dreams. The desire for closeness with someone that the dream then strips away. It doesn't play out like my dreams did, but the same feeling was evoked. The Madeline chase sequence suddenly felt a lot like the resulting panicked searches for friends in retrospect. It's at this point in the game where things get weirder, more abstract and less easy to explain, and Madeline's doubts about her goal really come to the forefront. Maybe climbing this mountain is going to be much harder than expected. Mess is a pretty constant state when you're suffering from mental illness. Inside your head is a mass of thoughts and negativity all piled up on top of itself. Thoughts swirl around and refuse to leave, and everything needs to be dealt with right now, or things will keep getting worse. Or so the gremlin tells me. But while I'm so busy trying to clean up the mess inside my head, mess piles up around me. I acquire piles of things where I say I'm going to do something, leave a physical reminder, and then never do that thing. Those things add up, and next thing you know, I can no longer see my coffee table and my desk is a mass of papers and notebooks full of unfinished thoughts. I'll clean it up eventually, I say. I never do. One big part of this mess, both internal and external, is a feeling that I need to be impressive, to win people over, and to prove that I'm not utterly terrible in every possible way. My anxieties are buried in deep insecurity, where if I'm not achieving something right now, then what good am I? I want people to like me, so I need to be as nice as possible to people, because if I don't do that, then someone will let me know in no uncertain terms that I'm deeply unlikable. But of course those attempts at niceness don't come from a desire to be nice, but a desire to appear nice. A desire to be loved and respected by everyone around me, but no one can hate me because the slightest bit of criticism proves, beyond all shadow of a doubt, that I'm the worst human being that ever lived. It doesn't matter what's going on with other people, as long as they like me. If this sounds like a warped view of interactions with other people, you'd be right. And this is perhaps where my depression and my anxiety manifested itself the worst. You see, I did impress someone once. Someone who made me happy. But I was still insecure, and this fear of it all crashing down made me abusive, manipulative, placing blame, not considering my partner's emotional state because mine was in turmoil and that's all that mattered. We're no longer together, which is perhaps not a surprise. The end of the relationship was marked with an email detailing every abusive behaviour I committed, and it made me realise just how deep the rot had gone. So deep it had made me a terrible person. My problems weren't just hurting me, they were hurting people around me. In the third level of Celeste, Celestial Resort, Madeline finds herself in an old hotel haunted by the ghost of its former owner, Mr. Oshiro. He is a lost soul who hasn't moved on from the closure of his hotel. We know this based on written evidence found throughout the level, in one of the few instances of Celeste using documents to tell its story. This level's an interesting one because it's an examination of two different damaged mindsets. Madeline, we can figure by now, is depressed, but so too is Mr. Oshiro, and this manifests differently in the two of them. Madeline is only interested in passing through and tries to communicate this, but struggles to be forceful enough until Madeline emerges and causes a complete communication breakdown. She mentions to Theo a few times that she wants to help Oshiro despite her frustrations and paints a picture that she's trying too hard to please, perhaps out of insecurity. She's trying to be nice and ends up appearing meek. Oshiro is similar in that he's excessively nice out of insecurity, but there's something much darker under his facade. He can't accept someone not wanting to stay in his hotel, and when the reality that Madeline doesn't want to stay hits him, he turns into a monster, chasing Madeline aggressively in a tense platforming segment. I hate to admit this, but this was the character that I identified with the most in this level, and not Madeline. My personal fears of losing people were reflected back at me in his viewing a rejection of his hotel as a personal slight. His pushiness, his nervous asides to himself, and his ultimate explosion into anger were things I recognised shamefully in myself. There's something especially unsettling about this level. Aside from obviously dealing with a haunted hotel, the black, almost infected rooms of the hotel are unpleasant, and even worse when we realise the rot is the physical manifestation of Oshiro's insecurities. The fact that we have to clean out the hotel in a manner that feels like we're being manipulated by Oshiro is unpleasant too. Oshiro is never fully painted as a bad person though. His danger is a direct result of his pathetic nature, and shows how quickly insecurity can be turned outwards in a manipulative, abusive way. The chase ends with a dejected Oshiro slinking back into his hotel, refusing to talk to Madeline honestly. It's sad as much as it's uncomfortable. I feel pity for Oshiro. How do you know you're crazy? It's difficult to say if you've never really felt like you fit in, as there was always a feeling for me of being out of the norm. Being bullied for your entire school life does that to you. I also moved around a lot, so that combined with my fears of social interaction locked me out of a lot of things. It took a while before I started dating. I've rarely ever held onto a strong social circle. My career path is a disaster zone. And that's how you know you're crazy. When you crave social interaction every day, but you fear it to an equal measure. There have been numerous attempts to correct this in my life, but it's so easy to get pushed back, especially if you're trying to build your social life and career from the ground up with nothing to support you. And it's equally easy for those forces pushing you back to become relentless and unendurable. And with a minor setback, it proves that everything bad you've ever been told about yourself, and everything you now believe about yourself, is completely true. And you spiral into panic. The fourth level of Celeste, Golden Ridge, is one of the least narratively interesting levels in the game, and there's not really much to work with in regards to the larger mental health narrative. Only one part of this level is outwardly significant, and everything else is partly me reading into things, but it's still kind of relevant. First up, we encounter the old lady from the start of the game again, who talks about the nature of being crazy, implying both her and Madeline fit the definition. That said, she's quick to point out that she does have friends despite appearances, and despite her desire to live on a dangerous mountain, she does seem to have her wits about her. But nothing in this interaction really speaks to how Madeline feels, aside from reinforcing her desire to keep climbing. The level itself introduces a new gimmick, the wind. Throughout this level, the wind affects Madeline's physics, pushing her backwards or throwing her forwards into unseen danger. This could be perceived as the point on her journey where things get especially hard and her efforts could be pushed back. This is a feeling that's easy to recognise if you've ever battled mental illness, as there's always a fear of relapse and being pushed back into old negative habits. The end of the level reintroduces Theo, who rides a cable car with Madeline to the next part of the mountain. However, Madeline shows up again and sabotages the car, sending Madeline into a panic. Theo helps Madeline to calm herself and push the darkness back. The new mechanic introduced here is reminiscent of actual breathing techniques that are used to treat anxiety and panic attacks, something I'm all too familiar with. And the game represents it well, and I find the section has a calming effect as I too end up breathing with the feather. It's a really effective section that hammers home Madeline's anxiety, and really kind of shows that the creators have experienced this themselves. Mental disorder is one of the worst experiences a person can have. When you get consumed by your fears and anxieties, the world is a dark place. Threats in every shadow, a feeling that there is no safe haven because you can't protect yourself from your own mind. At every turn, the gremlin in your brain is working to break you down. It's slow and deliberate, stalking you through every waking hour and biting at you whenever it gets the chance. There's the fear of judgment. When you spend your childhood bullied, every person you meet is a potential bully. eyes everywhere, judging and mocking you. Every single person you pass on the street looks at you with disgust and finds something wrong with you. You're a freak, an abomination, and how dare you show your face anywhere. I've learnt how to ensure that I don't stand out. I can't draw attention to myself. The risk is too great. They'll find me, the people who want to do everything in their power to destroy me. Everything's too hard. I'm worthless. Don't look at me. I can't do this. This is impossible. Leave me alone. Please, leave me alone. The fifth level of Celeste, Mirror Temple, is a dark, foreboding mystery of a level. Most of Celeste is fairly gentle, despite its challenge with soft music and a generally forgiving approach to failure and retries. The Mirror Temple doesn't follow these rules, and it stands out for it. The mirror theme came up already as Madeline emerged from one in level 2, but here the mirror is the focus. After exploring a dark yet empty temple, Madeline finds a huge mirror, and approaching it causes things to go wrong. The first thing is a new enemy, a creature that you have to control, using it to find and attack Madeline. You then encounter these throughout the level when you're back in Madeline's shoes, and they are relentless and invincible. You can stun them briefly by jumping on them, but they always come back. And this leads to a stressful experience as you try and navigate the level while trying not to get killed by these things. The Mirror Temple is the point which lays out the mental health theme the clearest, representing the relapse many of those suffering from mental turmoil go through when trying to heal themselves. It opens in darkness where your path isn't clear and ominous monstrous statues loom out in the limited light. There's no immediate threat outside of spikes and falling off things, but this section of the level suggests a threat is coming. You just don't know when. It's a huge contrast to the vibrant areas of past levels. The Mirror Temple is claustrophobic, uninviting, and ominous. And of course things get worse when you cross through the mirror. This level is likely to place the player in a permanent state of anxiety as you try and avoid the many creatures giving chase. This anxiety gets worse towards the end of the level when it becomes everyone's favourite mission in video games, an escort mission. Every aspect of this is designed to make the player feel uncomfortable, anxious, and ready to just give up. And that's what anxiety can feel like, especially when you're pushing against your comfort zone in an attempt to improve. As you push through the anxiety, it pushes back. And I find this level to be an apt metaphor for that. And what's more, it works for both Madeline and Theo, whose thoughts the Mirror Temple is using to create its twisted reality. For Madeline, she expresses at various points in the game that she feels like a screw-up and that nothing she does will ever be good enough. Climbing the mountain is a way of her facing that feeling and trying to achieve something, even if it's a little extreme. The creatures in this level are those intrusive thoughts, endlessly trying to attack Madeline. At one point, she even asks why they're trying to hurt her if they came from within her, and well, that's a mood. For Theo, he feels paralysed, which leads to him being physically encased in crystal. We learn more about him later, where he expresses not really having much direction and living in the shadow of his grandfather. He puts a lot of focus into his social media account, which leads to the level being full of creepy eyeballs. At first, I thought these eyeballs represented Madeline's social anxiety and fear of being judged. But then I noticed they look at Theo, not Madeline. They're representative of his social media followers, who are essentially applying their own level of judgment on him. Theo is trapped because he's compared to his successful family members, and because his social media followers expect certain types of content out of him, and he must provide. And look, I don't want to throw shade on any of you watching this, but if you've ever thought, man, why doesn't he do Let's Plays or the PlayStation All-Star stuff anymore, then this is exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes you want to do things that your followers aren't necessarily here for, but what they are here for has become a creative dead end for you. And that brings its own anxieties, so I feel you, Theo. I've not touched on the music much so far, and I will talk about that later, but it's worth mentioning here as it takes on a completely different tone to the rest of the game. It's unpleasant, distressing and discordant, and doesn't have the same calming effect the rest of the game's soundtrack has. It makes you feel more tense, and when a reversed message shows up, featuring the voice of the composer voicing her own anxieties, that heightens the tension. The Mirror Temple wants you to feel uncomfortable. It wants you to recognise Madeline's anxieties and Theo's fears, and it's so effective at doing this. This happens in the next level, but I'm talking about it here. The level opens with a quiet campfire chat between the two mountain climbers where we learn more about their fears and concerns, and it's a nice little come down after the game went out of its way to upset you with the previous level before it carries on with its main journey. It's a really nice touch. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this section, but it is a nice bonding moment that helps me warm to these two even more. They're actually both really likeable characters, and I commend the team on how well they're written. I've hit rock bottom twice. The first time, I'd lost a job and a girlfriend. Neither were particularly great to have in retrospect, but at the time it felt better than nothing. And without either, I couldn't function. I started to drink more, at a time when alcohol didn't fast-track me straight to a hangover, and I just lost all sense of myself. The second time came years later, following the realization of how abusive I'd become in my later relationship, and it shattered my sense of self irreparably. By this time, my alcohol intolerance had really kicked in, so without the ability to chemically numb my pain, I ended up calling the Samaritans in the dead of night because my anxious negativity wouldn't leave, no matter how hard I tried. Hitting rock bottom forces something out of you. It forces you to look back at yourself and ask how you got here. It forces you to fight back against your worst impulses, and the only way you can do that is to accept them as part of who you are, and realise you have the power to change them. But it's not easy. I've grappled so much with the worst parts of myself that to accept them feels unacceptable. But if I don't, I stagnate. Or worse, I crash right back to where I started. And I never get better. The sixth level, Reflection, sees Madeline flung to the bottom of the mountain, forced to start over. She confronts Madeline and says she doesn't need her anymore, which Madeline reacts negatively to. Madeline attempts to calm herself down with her breathing technique again, but Madeline shatters her feather in a shocking twist. It's a great moment. You never kick mental illness. It does a good job of kicking you, and the way to manage it is to get better at dealing with the kicks as they arrive. And yeah, sometimes your techniques to calm yourself and work to improve can be shattered by the very illness that you're using them to counter. Mental illness is a bitch like that. Madeline represents this quite nicely in the level a little while after this, as she sees her own reflection and asks why Madeline won't leave her alone. She expresses a fear that everything she's tried has been for nothing and she's failed. Again. She expresses this to the old lady who she encounters once again, and through this conversation she mentions that she doesn't want to give up, but is always held back by the negative part of her. It's a sentiment I've felt time and time again as I push myself to overcome social anxiety, only to be held back by the anxieties I'm trying to get over, and feeling like I'll never get better. But this is the turning point. The old lady informs Madeline that she should just ask what the negative part wants. What follows is a confrontation where Madeline tries to approach her negativity and keep pushing despite the attack she's throwing back. And ultimately the two join together and Madeline accepts the negative part of her. And she makes the decision to finish what she started, something she can only do once she's accepted her worst qualities as part of her. Because ultimately, you can't climb your mental mountain until you've realised you need every part of you to reach the summit. Something I know all too well. My dreams are different now. Where once I would journey to places with friends and end up in a panic when they vanish from my life, now the same scenarios play out, but I never lose my friends. I no longer fear people just disappearing. If you're wondering how I moved on from past abusive behaviours, I faced them head on and internalised them. And I made a promise to myself to never ever do that to another person again. Every day I push myself to be nicer for the sake of being nice. I want to make people happy, and not just so they'll like me, but just because it feels nice to do. And my relationship with the partner that I was abusive towards actually couldn't be better. We're still friends, yes. And her support and continued belief in me despite everything allowed me to find strength within myself too. I've also made more friends, and that's pretty great too. So my support network has gotten even bigger. Once I'd accepted the negative aspects of myself as something that was part of me and something I could work to fix, things became easier. I'd be lying if I said I was cured, because you never cure mental illness, and certainly I get depressed easily the more tired I am, which shows the mental effort it takes to still keep moving forward. But moment to moment, I'm better. My self-esteem is much higher and I feel more capable. I'm less likely to just give up. And what is this feeling? I feel content? Since when? No matter, I'm just glad to feel this way. And I'm determined to stay this way, and even more so, I believe that I can. Discounting the secret bonus core level and the B and C sides, the final main level of Celeste is a triumphant blast through a compilation of all the levels that have come before. Madeline has found new strength, which allows her to stay airborne longer and be able to push through previously impossible challenges. The music swells in a way that says, "You've got this, keep going," and eventually, after a challenging yet exhilarating climb, you find yourself at the summit. Successful. You did it. Congratulations. Time to go and make a strawberry pie. The feeling of elation that comes in this level as Madeline works with her negative self to push forward is the same elation that came when I woke up one morning and realised that I hadn't felt miserable about myself in a long time. At least, the depression doesn't hit as frequently, doesn't hit as hard, and doesn't last as long. There is no better way to end this beautiful little game, and the accomplishment Madeline feels and the friends she made along the way means she can return home with a renewed sense of self. The game acknowledges that she isn't magically better, which I approve of, but she's in a much better place for achieving what she has, which is also where I am too. And it feels good. Celeste is frequently talked about as a positive representation of mental health issues, but is that true? My answer is no. We don't really see Madeline struggle. We see her talk about her struggles, we see her determination to reach the summit and prove herself, and there are definitely moments like the Mirror Temple or the encroaching darkness that pushes Madeline to breathe, where we see glimpses of what she's going through, but we don't see the whole thing. And that's because, to me, the story of Celeste is actually one of recovery, and it's one that's told in every facet of the game's design. There are few games that so effectively tie their narrative to the core gameplay mechanics and the audio-visual design, but Celeste nails this in every way, which is why I wanted to make this video, to celebrate how much it does this. The game presents itself as a hard-as-nails Twitch platformer similar in tone to the brutal Super Meat Boy, for example. But the actual experience of playing Celeste is not brutal, it's gentle. Certainly the platforming challenges are hard, but the way the game presents them to you is anything but. Challenges are largely kept to a screen, and checkpoints are frequent. The game's initial levels are simple and let you play around with the mechanics. Even the unique mechanics for each level are handled in a really gentle way, often giving you a safe spot to figure out how the challenges work. And you can figure it out at your own pace. The game rarely rushes you unless it's a chase sequence, which usually show up at the end of each level. The main game also never gets brutally tough. Those challenges are reserved for the B-sides and C-sides levels, which are optional. So too are the bonus strawberries that you can find dotted about the place. And the game makes this clear. Loading screen tips inform the player that it's okay if they mess up, and the game's death counter is meant to be an indicator of how much you're learning. The game tells you that failure is going to happen, but you'll make it through eventually with perseverance and patience. All of this is wrapped up in a beautiful soundtrack from the composer Lena Raine, whose pieces aren't grand, fast-paced epics, but instead lo-fi beats to climb mountains to. Because of how chilled out the music is, I found myself accepting failure more. The music was soothing and encouraging in its own right. The sole exception, as I mentioned earlier, is the Mirror Temple, where the music is a chaotic, scary mess. An intentional design to highlight the feeling of anxiety in that level specifically. And then there's Theo, bless him, the ever-present fellow climber who chats with Madeline about everything and presents a positive, go-getter attitude. He has his own problems, but they never seem to get him down. He is the supportive friend that everyone needs. Madeline is climbing Celeste Mountain not because it's her mental illness, but because if she climbs it, she will prove herself to be better than her mental illness. It's therapy, because when you finally realise you need help, you also realise how hard the journey to recovery is going to be. As the start of the game shows, you are standing at the foot of a mountain, wondering if you're making a mistake. You fail, and you fail again. But you are encouraged through therapy and supportive friendships to keep trying, to keep pushing, and to face those challenges head on, no matter how scary they feel. Madeline's therapeutic journey winds through the initial decision to overcome the illness, a confrontation with the negative self, an examination of how your issues affect the lives of those around you, an intense amount of pushback, a moment where the disorder fights back hard, a massive setback, and finally, an acceptance of the negative self. Madeline reaches the top of the mountain and then immediately returns home. She did what she set out to do, but there's also a clear feeling from the game that she hasn't solved the problems that she's got back home. She still has to face those problems, but now her mindset is different. She achieved something and can now carry that pride forward. And that's the mental health journey. It's never truly over. There's a point where you reach your personal summit, but it doesn't solve all your problems. You can recover, but there needs to be continuous efforts to maintain your improved state of mind. Those efforts get easier over time, but you'll never truly be cured. And that's why Celeste, for me, is a masterpiece of storytelling in an interactive medium. The mechanics tie into the story and push the player to adopt the recovery mindset. You will fail, but that's okay, because you've learned something. And my time with it was spent in shock of how much I saw my own experiences reflected back at me, the experiences that I've detailed in this video. So if you are wondering why I was bringing all that stuff up, that's why. I climbed my mountain. I find it easier to counter negative thoughts about myself, and I know when to better step away and look after myself more. There's still a lot of work, and there always will be, but I'm a better person now than when I started my own climb. And now I'm able to comfortably talk about my experiences like this in the hopes that they help someone else. and to be able to say definitively just how much Matt Thorson, Noel Berry and their small team made one of the finest representations of mental illness and the therapy it requires in video games. Thank you for watching, everyone. This was an intensely personal video for me, but it's one that I really wanted to share with you all. I would really appreciate any constructive feedback or thoughts you had on this video, and while you're there, a like and subscribe would be welcome too. And if you are struggling with mental illness of your own, or you've been affected by anything I talked about today, I urge you to seek help. And I've done my best to link to some helpful resources in the description. But I also hope this examination of Celeste through the lens of real mental illness shows you that everyone has a mountain, but everyone has the potential to climb it too. And I think that's a really solid message to end this video on. Thank you for watching.